classroom was filled with the quiet murmurs of students shifting in their seats, some whispering under their breath, others exchanging amused glances. At the front of the room, the teacher stood with a smug expression, her arms crossed as she eyed her latest target. She had orchestrated this moment carefully, a performance disguised as a lesson, but in truth, it was something else entirely, a way to expose what she assumed would be an awkward and embarrassing display. With a flourish, she gestured toward the grand piano standing at the side of the room. The instrument, polished and pristine, reflected the overhead lights, almost glowing with an aura of anticipation. A few students chuckled under their breath, already predicting the outcome. She had chosen this challenge with precision, confident that it would force discomfort, that it would provide entertainment at the expense of the one now standing in the spotlight. The room had always been a space where intellect and skill were measured under the careful scrutiny of the teacher. She took pride in shaping the narratives within these walls, deciding who thrived and who stumbled. And now, she believed she had orchestrated a moment that would reaffirm her authority, solidifying her belief that some people simply didn't belong in certain spaces. As the moment stretched, she let silence settle over the room. It was a tactic she had perfected, allowing the weight of expectation to press down, making the inevitable misstep feel even heavier. The anticipation was thick, almost tangible, and she basked in it, waiting for hesitation, for a faltering step, for a plea to be excused. But instead, something else happened. Without a word, the one now standing before the piano moved with quiet confidence, not with the nervous energy she had expected. There was no fumbling, no awkward glances toward the crowd. Instead, there was an ease in the way hands hovered over the keys, fingers brushing against them as if greeting an old friend. The teacher's smirk faltered just slightly, but she didn't let the doubt settle. Surely this was just bravado, a momentary attempt to save face before inevitable failure. And then, the first note rang out. It was not hesitant, not the clumsy pressing of keys one might expect from someone unfamiliar with the instrument. It was deliberate, precise, carrying with it a weight of familiarity, of experience. Before anyone could process what was happening, another note followed, then another, seamlessly weaving into a melody so rich and fluid that it commanded the attention of every single person in the room. The chuckles died instantly, the whispers stopped. Even the teacher, who had been so sure of how this moment would unfold, found herself frozen in place. The melody continued, building with effortless grace, each note flowing into the next with a mastery that could not be faked. This was not the hesitant stumbling of someone forced into an uncomfortable situation. This was something else entirely. The classroom, once filled with barely restrained amusement, now held only stunned silence. Eyes that had been alight with expectation of failure were now wide with something closer to disbelief. No one had anticipated this. No one had even considered the possibility. The teacher's confidence wavered further, her carefully crafted moment unraveling before her eyes. She had intended to make a point, to remind everyone of a presumed deficiency, to prove that some people did not belong in certain spaces. Instead, she had unknowingly provided a stage for something extraordinary. The notes grew more intricate, the melody deepening in complexity, fingers moving across the keys with a fluidity that spoke of years of dedication. This was not a forced performance. This was not a reluctant compliance with an unfair demand. This was a revelation. The students, who had once been waiting for a reason to laugh, now sat motionless, transfixed. Some leaned forward, drawn in by the unexpected beauty unfolding before them. Others exchanged glances, but now there was no amusement, only astonishment. And the teacher, the architect of this moment, could do nothing but watch as her plan crumbled. The power she had wielded, the authority she had used to manipulate, the situation was slipping through her fingers with every note that rang through the air. This was not the outcome she had expected. This was not the story she had intended to tell. The air in the room had shifted. What had started as a spectacle designed to provoke embarrassment had transformed into something entirely different, something no one had anticipated. The teacher, who had stood with such certainty, expecting a moment of awkwardness, now found herself caught in a silence so profound that it was almost suffocating. The melody flowing from the piano was not hesitant, not uncertain. It carried with it a depth that defied expectations, filling the space with a resonance that could not be ignored. It was the kind of music that did not ask for attention but demanded it, not through force but through sheer artistry. The hands that moved across the keys did not falter. Every note was struck with precision, not a single misplaced movement betraying hesitation. The students who had once exchanged amused glances now sat frozen in place, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something closer to awe. They had been prepared for a moment of second-hand embarrassment, something to smirk at, something to whisper about later. Instead, they were witnessing something remarkable. The teacher's smug expression had been replaced by something else. Something uncertain. She had stood confidently before, reveling in the control she held over the moment. But now, she was no longer the one commanding the room. The music had taken over, stripping her of the authority she had wielded so effortlessly just moments before. The performance was not merely competent, it was mesmerizing. The depth of the sound, the richness of the tones, the way the melody ebbed and flowed with such natural grace. It was the kind of skill that could not be faked, could not be improvised. This was not a reluctant attempt to play along, not an effort to escape humiliation with minimal effort. This was mastery. The weight of realization settled over the teacher, pressing down heavier with each passing moment. She had believed herself to be in control, to have orchestrated the moment with careful precision. But she had miscalculated. She had not expected confidence. She had not expected excellence, and she certainly had not expected to be the one standing, in stunned silence rather than the one she had sought to embarrass. Every note that rang out was a contradiction to her expectations, a quiet yet undeniable defiance against the narrative she had been so sure would play out. And with every passing second, her own authority seemed to diminish, replaced by something far greater than she had anticipated. The students, once restless, now hung onto every sound. Their expressions, once filled with amusement, had softened into something else. Some leaned forward unconsciously, drawn in by the sheer beauty of what they were hearing. Others sat back, their expressions unreadable, as though trying to process how something so unexpected could unfold before them. The teacher had underestimated the weight of talent, the way it could shift a room, the way it could turn ridicule into reverence. And now she was left with nothing to say, her carefully planned moment slipping through her fingers like sand. She had intended to prove a point, but now she was the one being proven wrong. The energy in the room had changed. What had started as an attempt to amuse at someone else's expense had become something entirely different, something no one had been prepared for. The moment the first notes filled the air, any sense of ridicule disappeared. What was once a light-hearted anticipation of embarrassment had transformed into a stunned, almost reverent silence. It was not just that the melody was beautiful, it was commanding. It moved through the space with purpose, sweeping across the room like a force that could not be ignored. The notes weren't just played, they were woven together with an artistry that turned sound into something tangible, something that held every single person captive. Students who had been exchanging glances before, waiting for a reason to laugh, now found themselves caught in an entirely different kind of moment. Some had leaned forward without realizing it, drawn in by the sheer precision of each note. Others sat completely still, their expressions shifting from casual amusement to something more like disbelief. The teacher, who had orchestrated this entire situation, was no longer in control of it. What had been meant as a lesson in humiliation had turned into something entirely unplanned, a showcase of raw, undeniable talent. The certainty that had once been present in her stance, the self-satisfaction in her expression, had been stripped away as the music continued to pour out in waves of effortless brilliance. Every note told a story. Every chord struck carried an intensity that pulled the audience in deeper, making it impossible to look away. There was no hesitation, no faltering, no signs of discomfort. Instead, there was mastery, an innate understanding of the instrument, of how to create something that could silence even the most skeptical in the room. One by one, the The students, who had been expecting a moment of secondhand embarrassment, began to shift in their seats, their faces betraying their shock. There was no trace of the ridicule they had prepared themselves to express. No barely contained snickers, no whispered comments. Only a deep, profound silence that made it clear they were witnessing something far beyond what they had anticipated. The teacher's fingers twitched slightly at her side, her expression unreadable. This was not what she had expected. She had believed she knew how this would unfold, had assumed she could predict the outcome. But this was something else entirely. The performance only grew in intensity, the music swelling with a confidence that was almost defiant. There was no need for words, no need for explanation. Every note played spoke volumes, carving through the expectations that had been placed upon this moment and replacing them with something undeniable. What had started as an attempt to belittle had turned into an involuntary display of greatness. The weight of that realization settled over the room, heavy and unshakable. The teacher who had sought to teach a lesson was now the one being taught, and everyone in that room knew it. The final note rang out, and for a moment, the entire room felt suspended in time. The echoes of the performance still lingered in the air, as if the music itself refused to fade so easily. Every person in the audience remained frozen, caught, between the weight of what they had just witnessed and the inability to process it fully. There had been no stumbles, no awkward pauses, no hesitations that would have given the teacher the satisfaction of proving her point. Instead, what had unfolded was a masterful display of talent, something so undeniable that not a single person dared to break the silence that followed. The teacher, who had stood so confidently at the beginning, now found herself rooted in place, her expression unreadable. Perhaps she had prepared a smirk, a dismissive remark, some clever quip that would allow her to regain control of the situation. But now, there was nothing to say. No words could reshape what had just happened. No excuse could rewrite the reality that had played out before her. The students, who had once been waiting for an opportunity to laugh, remained still in their seats. The amusement they had expected had never come. What had replaced it was something entirely different, something that left them unable to do anything but stare. The power in the room had shifted. It was no longer the teacher who commanded attention. It was no longer the authority of a classroom, or the carefully constructed hierarchy that dictated who was to be respected and who was to be ridiculed. The music had erased all of that, rewritten the moment in real time, leaving no room for the mockery that had been so carefully planned. And then, slowly, the first sound broke the silence. Not laughter, not whispers, but applause. One student, hesitant at first, brought their hands together in a slow, deliberate clap. Then another, and another. The sound spread through the room like a wave, growing in strength, in certainty. The teacher did not move. Her plan had crumbled before her, leaving only the undeniable reality that she had tried and failed to manufacture a moment of humiliation. The students who had once followed her lead, who had trusted in the expectation of ridicule, now turned against that expectation entirely. The applause grew louder, more confident, until it filled the entire space. This was not politeness. This was not obligation. This was something real, an acknowledgement of what had just taken place, a recognition of a talent that had rendered them speechless. For the teacher, there was no more room to maneuver, no more opportunities to regain control. The moment had slipped away, replaced by something she could neither shape nor dismiss. And in the face of that overwhelming realization, she had no choice but to stand there, forced to accept the truth that everyone in that room now understood. The applause continued, growing stronger with each passing second, filling the room with a force that could not be ignored. There was no hesitation now, only the undeniable recognition of something extraordinary. The students who had initially waited for an opportunity to mock were now fully immersed in the weight of what they had just witnessed. Their laughter had been replaced with admiration, their skepticism with awe. The teacher remained still, her face betraying no immediate emotion, but the shift in her posture spoke volumes. The authority she had wielded so confidently before had slipped away, drowned out by the sheer power of the moment. There was nothing left to say, no sharp remark or dismissive comment that could undo what had just happened. The attempt to humiliate had not only failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The students, once following the teacher's lead, had now broken free from the intended narrative. They were no longer an audience to ridicule, they were witnesses to something far greater than petty mockery. And in their applause, in their genuine appreciation, they solidified the final blow to the failed attempt at control. Slowly, the sound began to fade, but the energy in the room remained unchanged. The teacher, who had once been the orchestrator of this moment, was no longer the one who held the power. That authority now belonged to the performance itself, to the undeniable display of skill that had just left an entire room breathless. There would be no recovery from this, no way to twist the outcome to fit the original plan. The lesson had been taught, but not by the person who had intended to teach it. Instead, it had come from an unexpected place, proving that talent, confidence, and grace could dismantle even the most carefully constructed attempts at belittlement. The last traces of applause faded, an unspoken truth settled over the room, one that would not be forgotten. The moment had been meant for humiliation, but it had ended in triumph, and for the teacher, there was no escaping that reality.